Well, hello everyone. This is Mel here. I have a new guest, Mohammed.
Okay, so I just wanted to show you the analysis of the orthography by Deroche.
Yeah.
This is from his book Qur'ans of the Umayyads.
Hmm.
So he analyzed about 5 words. The first is ibad, adab, qala, bi'ayat, and shay. So here is the analysis of the word qala. Qala is predominantly written in the defective way, that means without the alif.
Yeah.
And hand B and E, which are two of the scribes, stand apart. The former with 3 instances of the spelling with the alif and the latter with two. So that's very few exceptions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, we have a dominant defective spelling in these manuscripts.
Hmm.
And in the later manuscripts, for example, those in the Kufic scripts, the defective spelling, that means the one without the alif, more or less disappears, at least when it concerns the word qala. Some other words remained unchanged, which I'll show you an example of that later on.
Hmm.
We were also discussing the Ibrahim thing. This is a Van Puden's paper. Now, the standard claim of most people is that Baqarah alone had the spelling without the alif. But the truth is, when you look at manuscripts, that pattern doesn't really show up.
No, no,
So
that
some
was
surahs,
just to clarify. That wasn't my claim. I was just saying that it was dominant. I didn't mean that it was only in Surah 2. Just to clarify.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine. But the,
Yeah.
the actual claim made by people,
Yeah.
even by the Muslim tradition itself, is
Yeah.
that Ibrahim,
Yeah.
it's only spelled without the ya in Surah Al-Baqarah.
Yeah.
I'm saying that it's a bit more random than that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And these patterns, like which verse has which spelling, it actually is also consistent in early manuscripts. So that's another indication that scribes were adhering to a certain spelling. They could have changed it to Ibrahim over
Yeah.
here, and yeah, but they
They're
didn't.
essentially they're respecting the manuscripts because they don't want to mess
Yes,
with. They don't want to be second guessing things. They're 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 treating it as something that shouldn't be messed around with. Let's say. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So that's basically the analysis of orthography. Like I said, there are some problems. Uh, you can't really say that all of those 5 words analyzed by Desroches, all of them, for example, in the 7th century show an old spelling, and then in the 8th century they show a new spelling. You can't say that.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, most of the old spellings disappear by the mid 8th century. That is, I think we can show that.
Yeah. Can I just ask? Is he basing his dating? We'll put aside the issue of carbon dating, but is he basing his dating manuscripts solely on those 5 words, or is
No, he's not. He's
but
it's based on the writing style, this and other things like ornamentation
yeah.
and
But in terms of like the orthography, he's just focusing on those 5 words as
yeah,
a kind of as a tool.
he
Okay.
uses it as a comparison. He will later do the same. He will use the same 5 words in other manuscripts.
Yeah. Yeah.
He does this in his book
Yeah.
Qur'ans of the Umayyads.
Yeah.
Somewhere here he discusses his dating,
Hmm.
why he dated it to the
Yeah. I
seventh.
the reason why I asked that is I don't know if 5 examples, even if there are lots of them throughout the Quran, is statistically sufficient to make a statistically um, accurate conclusion. That's my I know I don't know enough about statistics, but I know that you have to have a large enough sample to make a statistically reliable claim. And this, I suppose, what I'm basically saying is we don't have enough evidence really to be 100%, well, not 100%, even to be 90% solid about the dating. That's the frustrating thing. But I think we're getting somewhere in terms of a potential date. Uh,
Yeah, if you're looking at orthography, the Paris Codex has about 45% of the text. That's quite a large
yeah,
amount of text, and it's by no means our only witness.
yeah,
Hiroshi in this book identifies a couple of manuscripts, Hijaz manuscripts, which could be just as early, and
yeah,
it's not like we don't have enough manuscripts. Like I showed you over here. this manuscript is, I think, complete. You can find it on the Corpus Coranicum website, and there are other complete manuscripts as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, which are getting published. More of these, they're only getting published now.
Yeah.
People are basically unaware of them 20 years ago. So
Yeah.
right now is the stage getting more information, and we should, yeah. But I
That would
think the
be how.
data we have now, it speaks pretty positive. It's not like you get a negative impression from the data. You
Yeah.
don't see you don't see, for example, evidence of change. And from the data we have now, we can already make some arguments that it wasn't Abdul Malik who did, much of the standardization of the Quran. It probably happened before Abdul Malik. We can already make arguments like that based on the data we have. And there are a couple manuscripts that are like all over the world which haven't even been published yet. So yeah, it's only, time will tell.
Yeah. The frustrating thing for me is I don't think the evidence is strong enough to be too categorical just yet. And I have just the sneaky feeling that there are two camps, the Uthmanic camp and the Abdul Malik camp, each with their own kind of desire that that camp is correct, but not really having the winning evidence that would push one way or the other, especially when we're not really talking about a huge length of time between the two. So the Uthmanic is 650s, right?
Yeah,
And then we're only talking another, 40 years later for the other. That's not a lot of time. So it's very hard.
yeah, you're correct.
Yeah.
Right now, we don't have enough data to differentiate between a manuscript from the 650s
Yeah.
and, for example, 680. But I
Yeah.
think Deroche and others have made arguments where we can differentiate between like 700 and 650.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
even Shoemaker, in his recent book, he didn't completely understand Desroches' argument for the Codex Parisino Petropolitanus. He actually more or less accepts that there's a possibility that this could predate Abdul Malik. Now, if this manuscript predates Abdul Malik, that severely challenges any idea that Hajjaj did something like major. So in order to accommodate a late codification, like basically during the time of Abdul Malik, you have to ensure that this manuscript was produced afterwards. Because if you look at the text of this manuscript, it's way too close to our text. So it's either Hajjaj used this very manuscript, or the text was already standardized to a large extent before Hajjaj or
Yeah.
Abdul Malik.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically, like we have a lot of manuscripts nowadays. So we have quite a few manuscripts which we can date to like 710, 700s, and that we can do it with some confidence, like this, based on, the similarities with Abdul Malik's inscriptions. I think this is a pretty solid argument,
Yeah.
and the fact that the script in the Hijazi script is less homogeneous, and the orthography as well is not as developed.
Yeah.
And also you can also point to the fact that over here you have vocalization. You have these red dots for vocalization.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hijazi manuscripts, a lot of them don't even have this. So that again, but that's a less convincing argument. I think the strongest arguments we can put forward are the script style and the
Yeah.
orthography.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. And another argument that has been made for the fact that all manuscripts we have today were copied from an original text is Haitham Sidki's recent study on the regionality of early manuscripts. So basically, I'm sure you're aware that, in the Uthmanic standardization, copies were made and they were sent to at least 4 places: Kufa, Basra, Syria, and one from Medina. There are reports of, there are, some scholars who think that there was a Meccan codex, but again, it's a bit disputed at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
And these 4 ancestral codices, that means the Kufan codex, the original one sent to Kufa, the original one sent to Basra, the original one sent to Syria, etc. All of them had, if you compare them, they have 40 or so variations. That is according to the Muslim tradition. And if you look at early manuscripts, you see the same variations in the earliest manuscripts.
Yeah. I know from what's her name? Hatun Tash, who has a scholar looking at the variations between various manuscripts, that there are actually, in terms of the Arabic Qurans we have today, and I don't know if they looked at the earliest manuscripts, but they're finding thousands of variations. They may not be all
Yeah,
major
so that
ones.
is,
Is
yeah,
that
that is not, they're
that's a
not looking at,
different that's a different
yeah,
thing?
I don't think they are looking at the earliest manuscripts.
Yeah,
I've seen one or two of Jay Smith's videos.
yeah,
It's about the qira'at, the reading traditions, which we'll
yeah.
discuss
Okay,
later.
all right.
And it's
Okay,
a discount.
different story.
There aren't thousands of variations. There are a couple, but it's
Mm.
not thousands. We'll discuss that a bit later. Yeah, and then so now that we've discussed more or less on how to prove um, the existence of an early or the arguments that have been made for an early codification of the Quran, we can look at the text of the manuscripts themselves. So Daniel Brubaker is an example of a scholar who's working on this subject. His work is devoted to documenting the corrections in manuscripts from the 7th to 10th centuries. And he proposes that there was a small amount of flexibility in the earliest manuscripts. I don't really agree with Brubaker's analysis of the data. You can read, he had published a book, I think in 2019. Haitham Sidki had also written a review of that book, which identified a couple of problems in his analysis. But I will discuss briefly one of his more recent works, where he discusses 38 examples of corrections related to the word Allah
Yeah,
across 15 or so manuscripts. This is a rough number. I didn't actually count how many manuscripts he used.
yeah. Are you
So when you look at the,
are
yeah.
you using your PowerPoint now? Just so because I'm seeing a PDF.
Oh, I haven't. Yeah, I was using my. Yeah, so can you see my screen?
I can indeed. Yeah, yeah, can see that.
Yeah. So in a recent article, Brubaker discusses 38 or so examples of corrections related specifically to the word Allah. And he argues that there was some amount of flexibility in the earlier centuries.
Hmm.
So I'll discuss a few examples of these corrections. Oh, okay, yeah. So a couple of these corrections were made by the original scribe. I don't think Brubaker stresses on this fact enough. Because the situation that Brubaker is imagining or he's proposing is that the scribe, he was writing the Quran and he came across this verse and he disagreed with what the Uthmanic text had to say, or whoever you trace the text back to, whether it's Abdul Malik or Uthman or whatever. He disagreed with that version and he wrote down what he thought was correct. Okay? And if the scribes were doing that, it's kind of difficult to explain why the original scribe himself corrected it. These corrections were made by the original scribe. I think I should have mentioned that whenever there are variations within a manuscript, usually you can find them to be corrected. And these corrections are, of course, made towards the standard text, meaning that originally something different was written, and then a later corrector, or sometimes it was the original scribe himself, they changed it to the standard text.
Can I just challenge you there a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're arguing that it's most likely that the corrections are made by the original scribe, but I can see, for example, the top left example. There's a different pen. Certainly, it's a very different color being
Right.
used there. So it does look like it's a different scribe to me. So why is it most likely made by the original scribe? What's the basis for that
Yeah, this one,
assertion?
this is actually a bit unclear. This one it looks a bit different. I was going to mention that, but it's still fairly similar. The writing style, still the same writing style as the original script. It's just the ornamentation, the orientation, and it looks a bit darker. But that could always just be, our perception of things. Yeah, but even if you ignore this, you still have a couple of other examples. This is quite obviously the work of the original scribe. And Brubaker, he notes this. He notes that
Mm.
this was most likely by the original scribe. This as well. This one, again, it's a bit unclear, but it's probably the original scribe. And this one almost certainly is the original scribe. Now, even if it is not, if you look at this example over here, the word, if you admit the word it's not even a correction that concerns the word Allah. If you look at the corrections carefully, if you look underneath, you can see what was originally written, and you can see traces of the word Allah. So Allah was originally there. Brubaker, he notes this, but he still includes this as one of the corrections related to the word Allah.
Yeah.
And that's not the only thing. Yeah.
I do remember one particular folio that he looked at, which had possibly, I don't remember the exact number, but possibly about a dozen insertions of Allah, and there wasn't even space. There wasn't even space to fit Allah in. I find your argument hard to believe that a scribe could accidentally leave out Allah and then come back and say, "Oh, I forgot to put Allah in," and then put it in. It looks more likely that this was, someone came back maybe certainly at a later time and corrected the manuscript. It does seem like there was an earlier version and now there's a later version rather than accident. I don't believe in an accident if you leave Allah out 12 times in a folio. I don't think that's likely.
And give some discussion about those. The reason I included that in my book is that I had come across about a dozen examples involving corrections, insertions of Allah, and there are many other places, numerous other places where there are corrections involving the word Allah. Now, that should not be at all surprising, given the fact that the word Allah occurs in the Quran over 2,800 times. It's a very frequently occurring word, so we shouldn't be necessarily surprised that it's corrected frequently. However, there were interesting features about the corrections that I had found. In particular, a number of places in a single manuscript or several manuscript fragments coming originally from the same manuscript, from the same bound book, had insertions of Allah after the fact that had been omitted at the time of first writing, and the density of those was surprising to me. I'm not going to go into all those things today. I am, however, going to give you several examples of the types of corrections involving Allah. One where the word Allah replaces the pronoun. So the first one we're looking at today is from Marcel 5, folio 11R. This is in St. Petersburg. And this comes from Surah 34, verse 27. It is the only instance of Allah in this verse, and as it was written in this manuscript, it looks like it was omitted at the time of first writing, and the huwa, he is, was the only thing written. So the verse as it was first written appears to have said, "Say, show me those you have attached to him as associates. He is rather the Almighty, the All-Wise," as opposed to how it reads today, which is, "Show me those you have attached to him as associates. Allah is rather the Mighty, the All-Wise." So that is one example of the replacement of the pronoun with the word Allah, and there are several others in this chapter that I just submitted for this volume. The second manuscript I'm going to show you today is an insertion of Allah. As you can see, it was later than the time of original production. It's clearly a different nib and ink. It looks almost as though it could have been done in modern times. And the verse is Al-Araf 44. The word preceding the correction here, so the Allah is written in a superscript, but the word just slightly to the right of that is the word la'natu, which means curse. So as it's written now in this manuscript, it reads, La'natullahi ala zalimin, meaning the curse of Allah is upon the wrongdoers, or may Allah's curse be upon the wrongdoers. And as it was first written in this manuscript without the word Allah, it would have said, La'natu ala zalimin, a curse is upon, or may a curse be upon the wrongdoers. And by the way it exists in this manuscript now with the Allah there is the way that it exists in the Hafs text. All right, moving on, we're going to go to the last pair of corrections in different manuscripts of the same verse, and that verse is Surat Al-Ahzab 73. Well, the first one is Marcel 11, which is in St. Petersburg. It's on 10 verso, and you can see that there has been an insertion of the word Allah here. And as I believe it first read in this manuscript, it was written, Wa yatuba Allah al-mu'minina wal-mu'minat, that he might pardon the believing men and the believing women. And I believe what was done is it was erased, and the word Allah was written in here because that is the explicit object, and it is now in conformity with what is the standard Hafs text. And that was actually the second correction of this verse that I came across. The first one we'll flip over to now is in BNF Arab 340, and I mentioned this one in my doctoral dissertation. It's on folio 23 verso at line 16. And the superior text here starts in the same verse, actually, of al-Mushrikeen at the earlier in the verse, and it goes through the word Allah, which is right after the word Allah that was inserted above here, and that is the leftmost word in the previous slide. So this whole portion of text, it is the last line of the page, has been erased and overwritten. It's a little bit bunched in, although you see it is stretched out. The word Allah is stretched out there at the end of the line. The word Allah is a little bit bunched in there too, but not too bunched compared to the rest of the page. But you can see that this is a narrower nib, probably a different scribe and sometime post-production, although it's not entirely certain. It's possible that it was something that was done by a second scribe somewhere as part of the original production process. So that's all that I'm going to show you today, and I just wanted to run that example of two verses by you that are corrected in the same spot, not to suggest that the same issue is going on here, because I don't think it necessarily was. In fact, I would be surprised that it was, because it would be easier, it would have been easier to correct it without erasing the whole line if what was done in the operation in the first instance was similarly what was done in the second one. But we do have an overlap of corrections at the same spot.
Example like that. There is no manuscript that has 12 instances of.
Oh, there is. I'll actually. What I'll do is I'll put a screenshot of it on here afterwards, just to show people. No, there is. I remember it very distinctly.
Do you mean on Brubaker's channel?
Yeah, it's on his channel. Yeah, I remember seeing it.
I remember there was a video on a dozen corrections or so, but it was not all related to the word Allah.
No, I'm not saying they're all related to Allah, but there was like a huge number that was to Allah. Now, the exact number, it doesn't matter if it's 10 or 15 or 11, but it's a significant number that, like, I could, if someone made a mistake, maybe one or two, I could understand that, but at 12, no, there's no way, unless you're dealing with a generational change in the manuscript where, they've decided to make updates. That's, but anyway, that's, we're obviously not going to agree on everything here, but
it's not that I don't agree. I will address what you said in a bit.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So what we do see here is, over here, in each of these examples, actually, if you omit the word Allah, the verse is ungrammatical. And it is also, it is still possible. And in fact, there are many clear examples where the original scribe, when he was looking back, he corrected his own mistake.
Yeah.
Deroche and a lot of other scholars have made similar observations in many manuscripts. Corrections can be made by the original scribe. This is not something Brubaker disputes either.
Yeah.
Because if a scribe writes something down wrongly, is he just going to leave it there? Does he have to just leave it there? He has an option to change that, right?
Yeah.
And all he needs to do is just erase what he wrote initially and write down the correct text. And then there is a real problem here, that in all of these verses, the word Allah is required for the verse to make sense. So I think that is best illustrated here. These are not made by the original scribe. These corrections are made by a later scribe, as it is kind of obvious over here. Ila wa rasulihi. So the word Allah has been omitted. Now look at this translation if you're not aware, if you can't translate this.
Yeah.
So to Allah and his messenger. If you remove the Allah, what are you left with?
Well, it could be that there's another word instead of Allah that was there, because there's a part that underneath Allah that's sort of looks smudged. That could have been a word there. It could have been something else.
No, that is the waw. That is the waw. You can clearly see that the picture I present is not that clear, but you can see.
It's a waw, is it? Okay.
Yeah, wait. I can show you Brubaker's presentation over here.
Oh, yeah, it's a bit clearer there. Yeah, I can see it better there in that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and Brubaker himself notes that this insertion is quite interesting because it's part of the phrase Allah wa rasulihi. The insertion is clearly post-production, not something I dispute. However, the conjunctive waw, which is clearly original to the page, this waw here, makes no sense without the word Allah, making it unlikely that the text would have been read or intended without it.
Yeah, that's true. However, sorry, just to be playing devil's advocate a little bit. Well, that's true. and as far as I can tell now, not being an Arabic speaker, but at the same time, that's the color. The color is definitely darker. It looks like it's been
Right. I'm
done.
saying that this is a later correction. These are
Yeah.
not
Oh,
made by
yeah.
the original scribe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose there's no reason why that couldn't be by the same scribe, but at a later time.
No, these are definitely a later scribe. You can
All
clearly
right.
tell.
Okay. Yeah.
If it
Okay.
was the original scribe, it would look something like this. This insertion here is very similar. You can clearly tell. Can you see my arrow? It's good
No.
style.
I think you're. I think you. I'm only seeing the PDF that you just showed, so
Oh.
maybe you've switched. Yeah, I think it doesn't allow you to change tabs.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what an original correction would look like would be like this. Can you see?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So the ink is extremely similar, and so is this. The ink is extremely similar to the original text.
Yeah.
Yeah. But here it's completely different. So we know there's no dispute here that this is a later correction. Okay. The question is, does it make sense? And it doesn't. Ila wa rasuli. You don't need to be an expert in Arabic to know that it's only Allah that is here. And wa, which means and, is original text. So
What is-
original read.
What is the word to the right of Allah? If you're reading left now, I know you read it right to left.
Yeah,
So
this is ila.
So
that means two. So here we have the word. This is an alif, like alif, then lam, then ya. That is ila. That is two. Waw.
Waw means and, surely. Oh, so it's.
Yes.
Oh, right. So
two and his messenger.
Okay, I see
Two
what you.
and his messenger. That doesn't make sense. Right?
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, no, that's I think you've made a valid point there. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's not something that Brubaker himself disputes. As you can clearly see, he actually accepts that this was doesn't make sense. Yeah. He also accepts that this one doesn't make sense. Surely that is easy for Allah. He doesn't because Allah is required for this verse to make sense. Allah is the same in all the 5 cases. So it's an obvious scribal error that we're dealing with, and in this case, the scribal error was not corrected by the original scribe. Okay, so what do you think would be the most likely explanation here? Do you think it's possible that it's really a variant
I think
that we're dealing with?
Yeah, I think in the examples that you're given here, you're talking just scribal errors. That's it. Isn't that your point?
Yeah, that is my point.
Yeah. No, I'll accept that.
And sometimes we find variants that more or less that perfectly correspond with a variant that's reported in the tradition. This is actually one of this insertion of the alif. So here it's not like the scribe completely forgot the word Allah. He just wrote lillah instead of Allah. Lillah means for God. Allah means God. The la means it's a preposition here. For. Okay. Yeah. So sayaquluna Allah. This is actually one of the variants that was present in the original codices of Uthman. Sayaquluna lillah without the alif in this verse. So it's the variant that corresponds to something that is known in the Muslim tradition. This has been noted by Brubaker. This one he does note. The second one he doesn't note. La tabdila lil khalq was present in the original manuscript. Here, Allah was omitted, but this variant conforms to something that we know in the traditional literature. And a very important thing, which I think Brubaker does not mention at all, is the question: are there alternative manuscripts with the standard reading? Do you think this is an important question, to ask when you're dealing with manuscript variants?
Absolutely, you have to look at the full spectrum to see what's going on. Yeah.
Usually Brubaker does not tell us. He does not tell us which manuscripts have the standard reading, which ones don't. And it's important because what if this variant is repeated in another manuscript? Then that would suggest that it's not just a scribal error. It might suggest that we're actually dealing with a legitimate variant. So looking at other manuscripts could actually support Brubaker.
What does it mean when several of the earliest Quran manuscripts are corrected in the very same spot? Well, welcome back to Variant Quran. This is a special day and a day that some of you have been waiting for. I am going to be showing to you a spot in multiple early Quran manuscripts at which there has been a correction. Now, what we're looking at today is one of the things that I set out to hopefully find when I began the process of casting my net wide and surveying many manuscripts for the corrections, and that is the possible emergence of some patterns and repetition in multiple manuscripts of the similar corrections or corrections of a similar passage or spot in the Quranic text. And so, as you can imagine, these things emerge over time, and in the early time of my doctoral dissertation, I had noticed that there were at least 4 different manuscripts that had corrections at this particular spot at this particular verse, and since then I've actually come across a couple others that have corrections there as well. So I don't want to belabor this. We'll jump right in and take a look at these manuscripts. BNF Arab 328. This is a manuscript written in the Hijazi style. That is one of the earliest script styles that we find Qurans written in, and this manuscript lives at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris. I have reviewed it personally on 2 occasions at least, and have noted the correction at this particular spot. Now this is verse 9:109, Tauba 109, and the verse reads, and I'm reading here from the Majid Fakhri translation, is one who founds his edifice upon the fear and good pleasure of Allah better, or one who founds his edifice upon the brink of a crumbling precipice that will tumble down with him into the fire of hell. Allah does not guide the unjust people. And so in the Arabic of this verse, the portion that is overwritten in this particular manuscript is wa ridwanin khairun. So the first thing we're going to do is just look at what has been done in these various manuscripts, and then at the end I'm going to tell you what I think has happened at this particular spot. So what you see here is the words wa ridwanin and good pleasure better or. So the way that Majid Fakhri translates this has a little bit of a different word order than the way it appears in the Arabic. The way it appears in the Arabic is literally is the one who builds his edifice upon the fear from Allah and good pleasure, meaning his good pleasure, better, or the one who builds his edifice upon the brink of a crumbling precipice. Okay, so that's the word order as it appears in the Arabic, and what has happened here is the words wa ridwanin khairun has been written over in erasure. Now, some of those words, part of that may have existed before, but was possibly erased, and in order to make way for the new, what was then written afterward. Now we're going to talk about the possible reasons for this, and there are various reasons, commonly known as scribal errors or causes of scribal error, and we will consider those, as I always try to do initially when I'm looking at any correction, and we're going to consider those possible reasons to rule them out and make sure that they aren't the cause of these multiple corrections in these several Quran manuscripts. Okay, so that is BNF Arab 328. This is a probably mid to late 7th century manuscript, not long after the time of Muhammad. And here is the second one, BNF Arab 330. This also is written in a form of a Hijazi script. And as you can see in this manuscript, although you can tell it's a different scribe, it's clearly a different handwriting style. And this is one of the interesting things about the Hijazi scripts. And at some point I will do a video on the different script styles to give you an introduction to, I should do that soon, to give you an introduction to what the script styles generally look like, and you can see how the evolution of the script styles progressed over time. But both of these so far that we've looked at are forms of the Hijazi script style, and as I started to mention, the Hijazi script style displays most evidently the individual personality and writing style of the scribes. So you can see this is clearly a different person, just as different people have different handwritings. The script itself wasn't quite so formalized at this stage in the process, so different people is clearly recognizable when you have a change of scribe. All right, so what you see happening here is I believe at the end of the first line of text is the erasure of something that has been overwritten, and it is the wow of the word taqwa, or fear. Then you see on the next line, you do see some shadows of what was first written, which would be out into the margin. There are a couple things going on here. I'll talk about those as we progress. But the overwritten text is the final Aleph Maksura of Taqwa, and the word min Allah wa Ridwan, and I believe part of the word Khairun, better than. Okay, so this has been written over an erasure. It does look like the work of the original scribe to me. The writing style is similar. Maybe it's not quite as confident, but I'm not willing to say that it was not the original scribe. I think this does look like it is the work of the original scribe, and probably near the time of first production of this manuscript, although we can't be for sure on that. But the ink color and nib width and all the other factors point toward something that happened closer to the time of original production. So if we look underneath here, what we can see is that there is a shadow. Actually, that first Aleph Maksura and the word min seems to be kind of faded. And so if you were looking at it initially, as does the wow that ends the final line, it looks a little bit faded as well. So we'd want to think about what is going on there. But underneath the word Allah here, there is a shadow of the final Aleph Maksura of Taqwa. So you can actually see quite clearly what has happened here. The final Aleph Maksura of the word Taqwa was first written right at the beginning of this line, underneath the word, where the word Allah is written at this moment. And you can see that the word Allah was initially written after that, underneath where the word Ridwan is written. So clearly this text was first written without the word Ridwan, and was read is one who founds his edifice upon the fear of Allah better, or one who founds his edifice upon the brink of a crumbling precipice. And there's no question in my mind that that's what was first written in this manuscript. All right, so the word Ridwan was left out. And then it was later erased and extended out into the margin to make room for that word. All right, let's take a look at our third example here. This is from E20, and this is in the Institute of Oriental Manuscripts in St. Petersburg, Russia. This verse has, interestingly, a correction at the very same spot. It is a little bit bunched. I am not sure that this is the original scribe who made this correction. And you can see that the text is angled to the right. Particularly the upward extenders of the text is angled to the right. There are a couple things that have happened here, but it does look like it's a different ink and possibly a different nib, and I think a different scribe who wrote this corrected portion. And also you can see it's a little bit bunched in, although not terribly so. So once again, we have the words covering the word Ridwan is written over an erasure here, and the word min Allah. Okay, and we cannot see the word Taqwa in this case because the part of that page has been lost. But I assume that the word Taqwa existed there first. All right. So this correction has been made over an erasure, and after the fact, you can see one other thing, but it's not the focus of my attention here, is that the insertion of a red aleph here that exists as a dagger aleph in the Quranic text today. It's a little aleph that's written above the text, above the line, in order to show that this is to be pronounced as a long aleph, even though the long aleph is not explicitly written in the word. And so at some point in the development of the way that Quran manuscripts were written, alephs were inserted, and sometimes they're written in red like this, and so that would be corresponding to what we would see as a dagger aleph today. That is not the focus here. I just wanted to show you that there is a correction over this spot, including the word Ridwan. Good pleasure. Here's the third one. This is Marcel 9. It is at the National Library of Russia. Also an early manuscript. This probably is, probably early 8th century manuscript. It is a horizontal format manuscript versus the Hijazi manuscripts, which are almost always in a vertical format. And so the page dimensions changed over time. The style for producing pages changed, and so the initial pages were a vertical format, much like the format of how most books are produced today, with the page being taller than it is wide. And then at some point in time, maybe the early 8th century, they went to a horizontal, predominantly in a horizontal format, meaning they're wider than they are tall. And that is the case with this one, even though I don't show you the entire manuscript page here. All right, so once again, we see the word Ridwan being part of this erasure overwritten. And so the word Allah in this case is not, but the word Ridwan, Khairun and in this case Man is also part of it, as you can tell by the upward extending letter, which is erased under the meme of that. And also there's an aleph, the initial aleph of Asasa is written after the fact in this case too. So in each of these instances, the exact portion has not been erased, but I think the same thing has probably been happening, and that is the insertion of the word Ridwan, where it was initially omitted. You can see that the text is also a little bit bunched here as well, and so I think that's probably what happened here. All right, so those are 4 examples of correction at the same spot in the same verse, Surah 9, 109. All right, so here is just a simple side-by-side of the 4 manuscripts that we just looked at to help you visualize a little bit more clearly how they line up with one another, what corresponds between the 4. And as you can see, the exact area of correction is not identical, but they do have overlap. So the red boxes are drawn around the corrected portions. The second one down, of course, has 1 letter corrected on the, possibly corrected on the previous line. The third one down may have a correction that extends off to on the right side, but that part of the page has been lost. But what is corrected on the existing manuscripts on these lines is shown by the red square. And here you can see the common portion between all 4 of the manuscripts, and it is the letters, the word Wa Ridwan higher in each case.
Explanation. But he doesn't tell us which manuscripts have the standard reading. And nowadays it's not at all hard to find. There's a website which you can check out, Corpus Coranicum, or I should probably just...
Corpus Coranicum, yeah. It's run by Angelica, what's her name?
Neuwirth.
Neuwirth.
It's a very useful thing. You can just search the verse and you can find out what manuscripts have the verse, and you can see the manuscripts themselves.
Yeah. And
yeah, so most of these screenshots I took it from that website. If you look at this variant here, Sayyarallahu amalakum, the word Allah was omitted in this manuscript, but if you look here, it's present. If you look at this, is the Paris manuscript, so one of our earliest witnesses.
Yeah.
And here
I suppose the only thing is that, again, I have to play the devil's advocate just to. I suppose the thing if one manuscript is earlier than the other, okay, and one is at the time when, let's say, there was a re-edition, the re-editing of the Quran for various reasons, and then another one is after that time when things have been standardized, then you see what I'm going. So let's say he's pointing out the Sana manuscript. Perhaps that indicates that is a time when additions are happening, and then the other example that you gave, where it's all standard, well, that's
right.
That might indicate that that's at a later time when everything has been ironed out. Yeah,
but Brubaker doesn't actually discuss the Sana manuscript. All other manuscripts are of the Uthmanic text type. Means if you look at the text, it follows today's text closely, with the exception of these kind of variants, of course, which are very few. But so Brubaker, he does not discuss the Sana palimpsest. The Sana palimpsest variations are actually, some of them are more significant than these variations we see here. Okay, so we can completely ignore that for now, because right now we're dealing with an Uthmanic text. We're dealing with the Uthmanic.
Isn't it? Can I just sorry, I interrupt you. Isn't it interesting in each case when there's a correction made, it seems to make it standard with the Hafs Quran?
It's not exactly standard with the Hafs Quran. It's standard with the Uthmanic Quran.
Well,
I'll discuss that a bit later.
Yeah, like what I'm Quran, like the suspicion, and I'll have to be honest with you. The suspicion is that if old manuscripts were found which are inconsistent with the Hafs Quran, it wouldn't be totally unexpected that people were sent to work on the manuscripts to make them conform with the Hafs, because it would be embarrassing if there were manuscripts that were inconsistent with the Hafs. Do you see where I'm going? I'm not saying that there was forgery going on, but it could be an argument for forgery.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your argument completely.
Okay, so just say for argument's sake, and this is just like I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit. Let's say there were a pile of manuscripts found down in Sana'a in Yemen, and it turned out that these manuscripts, when the scholars looked at them, there's a lots of variation here. We need to clean up the manuscripts. I'm sure you could get a bunch of people who are handy with at doing this sort of thing to clean the manuscripts and fix the variations so that it fits with the current manuscript that we have today. How would you respond to that argument?
Okay, so first of all, the issue is we don't actually know when these corrections usually took place. It's not like they tie it down to a single event. Because it's not like earliest manuscripts have corrections, later manuscripts don't. If you look at a manuscript from the 14th or maybe even later century, you might still see corrections. The reason being, scribes make mistakes. None of these scribes are perfect. If you look at I don't know, if you look at Latin manuscripts, for example, you see a correction, you see an error. It's going to be corrected. If especially if it's by the original scribe, it's not too surprising to see corrections. And importantly for the Quran, the issue is people are going to be reciting these manuscripts. Okay, so these for example, these manuscripts are probably in some mosque, and some guy was reciting this manuscript later on, or maybe it's original scribe.
Some of these manuscripts were thrown down a tower in Sana'a, so they would have been not looked at for centuries. But what I'm arguing is there any clear way that we can tell that a correction was done in the 8th century, let's say, or in the 21st century? Like, there's nothing...
Yeah, that's a good question. And,
I don't think it's obvious, because I think you could fake it if you wanted to. Because like people fake 20 euro notes or 20 sterling notes so well that you can be fooled in a shop with them. So I don't see why someone who's good with forgery could easily just forge this if they needed to or wanted to.
Okay, so some of these corrections, like this one over here, we can't tell whether it's made in the 8th century or 9th century. Some of them you can. Some of them you can by looking at the writing style of the correction. The Paris Codex, I think Desroches had made an argument that some of the corrections were made in the 9th century.
But couldn't you fake it, like the writing style? Like you just have to mimic the writing style. Like I've heard of people that have imitated someone's signature, really well.
If you look at imitations of the Quran manuscripts, the texts that people can easily recognize as forgeries, they recognize them as forgeries because their writing style is completely different to what we see in the earliest copies. I don't think that people usually, maybe this has happened, usually they didn't actually consult early manuscripts. And if they did, they didn't have an idea of which manuscript is actually the earliest.
No, what I'm saying is, so I'm just saying, like, say if they had a Sana'a manuscript, they have the writing style there. They need to fix a few words here or there. They have the writing style in front of them. They could look at the style that's there in front of them and just copy that. Could they not do that?
Usually, if you have a correction, even they don't. The people, they don't bother making it similar to the original text. And sometimes there are indications why it was made by the original scribe. Like, for example, here the ink is way too similar to the original scribe, right? So that's why we argue that it's made by the original scribe. And usually we can find corrections easily because they're just inserted in a place which obviously can't contain it originally. Like over here, you can clearly tell that all the space here couldn't have had the word Allah, right? This is the original ink, this is a later ink. It's very straightforward. It's usually that straightforward. Now, the Sana'a manuscript, the Sana'a palimpsest, is an exception. That's the only manuscript that I'm aware of that differs, that has major differences. Okay, that's the only manuscript. All the others, you will have corrections. But they're not going to be like 90 corrections per manuscript, or 100 or so. Each manuscript is different. So this is actually a point which I think Brubaker himself had made. if you look at the Allah corrections, a third of them come from the same manuscript. So what does that suggest? That scribe might have been more careless, right? And you also have to note that the word Allah, it occurs more than 1,000 times in the Quran. It's a very frequent word. If you want to show that there's some kind of relationship, you would have to compare the frequency of this Allah corrections to other corrections. And you would also have to show that these corrections, it's a significant amount of corrections occurs per manuscript. And that is not what Brubaker shows at all. As he, I think I'll share the screen. As he notes here, the corrections involving these words are distributed across the extant manuscript fragments, though not evenly. Nearly 1/3 of the insertions discussed above are found in the Fustat Umayyad Codex, and that is the codex which had the similarities between Abd al-Malik's script and So some important issues I think Brubaker does not address, let me just summarize, is the issue of scribal errors. Some of these manuscript variants, they just don't make sense. And as you yourself seem to agree, the most likely explanation is probably scribal error. And you also have to account for the fact that Allah occurs very frequently in manuscripts. Okay? Occurs almost 1,000 times, or more, actually more than 1,000 times. So the fact that you see 1 or 2 corrections per manuscript related to the word is not significant, if you ask me, especially if you can identify these kind of problems.
Yeah.
Problems like
I suppose I would say probably the pamphlet set issue is probably more significant. If you have a whole thing being wiped out and there's a different version of the Quran underneath, I think that's probably more significant. But there are the manuscript where you had a lot of variations on one folio to do with Allah. I think that, to me, that was quite a strong argument for a significant
that
update.
We're talking about is this one. The manuscript that had many corrections related to the law is
what?
This one. Yeah. All other manuscripts, you only see 1 or 2 instances of Allah corrections.
Okay.
Actually, it's probably just like 1 correction.
Yeah.
So I think if you are going to try and argue that there's something going on related to the word Allah, you should collect all the instances of Allah in a particular manuscript and do this for all the other manuscripts as well, and see if there's like a lot of corrections related to the word Allah. If you see 5 corrections, that's a lot. Even though the word occurs like 1,000 times, if you see 5, that's still quite a lot. But if you see like 1 or 2, I don't think that's a lot. And majority of these manuscripts, you only see 1 or 2 corrections related to the word Allah.
Okay.
But the Umayyad Codex, that I would probably agree that we're dealing with something going on. But it's not really important to me because, as I mentioned, earlier manuscripts or later manuscripts have the standard reading. This is the Umayyad Codex. Can you see it? Yeah. So I wanted to show this as just as an example because you can see there are quite a lot of corrections in this manuscript. Some of them are very innocent. Like you see this word qala over here, it was spelled without the alif. Just like I told you earlier. So a later scribe, or probably scribe, did was he erased the connection between the qaf and lam and he inserted another. Basically just correcting it towards the normal spelling.
That looks very recent now, the correction. That looks like there could be a century or more between the old script and the new, because it's very dark.
It's possible, but it's possible that it's later. It doesn't really matter, because in this case, we can clearly tell what's going on, and it's just a spelling thing. So again, there are many different reasons why a correction can occur. Sometimes it's just as innocent as spelling. See, every single instance of qala and qalu are corrected. Here's another one, akhafu. It's again concerning the dagger alif. The word akhafu is the alif is inserted. So there are a couple of examples just like this.
Like one of the corrections of the spelling was kala, wasn't it? Wasn't that one of the words that De Roche used to date a manuscript? Am I right? So,
Yeah.
so what if DeRoche sees the word Kala there and just ignores the fact that it was a correction, sees the correct spelling, but it's actually it's been corrected by a later scribe? Does he date it according to
Yeah, he
that?
will take the original spelling. He will take the original spelling.
So he's
And
not going
usually
to take into account that it was a correction. He's going to
he will
just
take into account that there's a correction.
yeah.
He will look at the original spelling. What was there originally?
Okay.
It's only in some manuscripts that the word is corrected, of course. In the Paris Codex, you don't see it corrected a lot.
Yeah.
And so this is from Desroches' book again. He notes that in addition to the canonical variants, that's the differences between the Uthmanic mushafs, the regional variations, the copy contains small variants. Some of these are clearly the result of scribal mistake, some of which were actually corrected by the copyists themselves. So this is an important observation. And another observation is in the portion of the Quran which was transcribed by hand C, there seems to be a higher frequency of scribal mistakes. So these are all things that you need to take into account. You know, different scribes were had different levels of familiarity or qualification. Some of the scribes were probably more prone to error. You know, and sometimes you can easily identify that's a scribal mistake. If the text that is written there doesn't make sense, then it's a scribal error most likely.
Yeah.
And he says once the obvious scribal errors, some specific examples have been eliminated, there remain about 10 cases which cannot be satisfactorily explained as a peculiarity of the early Quranic or orthography, that's spelling, or as an error. So we're dealing with like 10 cases of minor variations. That's not really a lot for a copy that contains 45% of the text. And even in these cases, the variants consist of an additional coordinating conjunction, like a missing wow or something like that. That's pretty minor.
Yeah,
right?
I'd agree.
Yeah. So can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Yeah. And the final thing I'll leave you off with is, why is there a relationship between the presence of a particular word and a correction? So why was the word Allah controversial to some scribes? Is that something that you would infer from Brubaker's data? So how would you understand Brubaker's data? He collected about 38 examples of corrections related to the word Allah. Now, why specifically the word Allah?
I don't know if it was that it. I don't think it was necessarily that word was particularly of significance. I'm just trying to think back because it's about 2 years since I saw the video. I suppose it has a theological.
You don't need to refer to a video. You can just imagine a situation.
Well, I would say.
Yeah.
I would say if there was a manuscript that had an absence of Allah and then they inserted it, then that would obviously make a theological difference to the page. I'm not sure if I'm.
It won't really make a theological difference because usually it's just that Allah is the subject of the verse, but they omitted explicitly mentioning it. So in Arabic, you don't need to always say who the subject is.
Well, it kind of helps direct the reader. Potentially, it could be talking about anything. I think it does. If it's not clear it might not be clear without a mention, maybe. But without actually having the actual text in front of me, it's very hard for me to say. But so your point is that it's not really a big deal. If there was a page that had a lot of insertions of Allah in the one page, you don't see that as, or you do just see that as a scribal error that just omitted Allah's name quite a few times, but it was accidental. How would you?
Yeah, I think that scribal error does account usually. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, I'd agree with your general argument. Look at scribal errors I think it's a well established fact of human nature, I suppose, and it happens across every manuscript that's ever been written, Bible included, it's going to happen. It's not, because of the nature of human beings, but then to distinguish between that and an editorial edition, multiple insertions of a particular word would suggest
I understand the point.
editorial edition.
I understand I understand that you can think of scribal corrections as editorial changes, but I don't think there's evidence, because if you look at other manuscripts, you don't see the same variant. You see the standard text, whether you go earlier, whether you go later, or whether you go from the same period. If you look at manuscripts, you see the standard reading. So there's no evidence of editorial changes. Maybe in this specific manuscript, yes, there was like a change towards the standard text, But again, the text itself hasn't been changed. So if you look at a specific example of these kind of things, why are we assuming, why is it Allah? Why do you think Brubaker is looking at Allah correction specifically? Why should we assume that there's something significant going on related to the word Allah? If there is editorial changes, why would they be concentrated around the word Allah? That's what I'm saying. Can you understand that point?
Yeah. I can't specifically give you what the rationale behind it is, but I can imagine the difference between a page where there's an absence of reference versus one where there's a significant number.
Yes.
That would obviously make it more spiritual, let's say, or whatever. It's more theological if there's more references, let's say.
If you're looking at a specific manuscript variant, okay, yes, it's always possible that it's editorial change. Okay, I won't deny that. Okay, but why is it that we're looking at Allah changes specifically? Why would there be a concentration of variants, of changes specific to the word Allah? Does that really make sense?
Are you asking why is Brubaker focusing on that word? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
That's what I can't answer for Brubaker, so I don't see why you're asking me. I have no idea. That's one that he picked out.
It's not that I'm asking you.
All right.
It's not that I'm asking you. I'm saying that it's a problem. Why should we assume that there's a relationship here?
Yeah.
Why should we assume that there's going to be a correlation between manuscript variants, between editorial changes, for example, and the very word Allah? Why should we assume that there's a relationship there? This is something Brubaker doesn't address. If you look at Brubaker's work, any of his work, the actual portion that he spends to discussing the variants is very little. I'm sorry, it keeps changing my screen. Yeah. So if you look at this, for example, all he does is says the word Allah is inserted, not the work of the original scribe. Okay, but anyone can tell that. Anyone can do this. The real thing that that a researcher in manuscript should be doing is identifying or making a proposal explaining why this specific variant is an editorial change, or why it's simply a scribal error. Okay, so you have to account for specific instances, each specific correction, and that's something Brubaker doesn't do. This is his description. It's that short. All he does is tell us insertion of Allah, not the word of the original scribe. So if you look at the other,
Okay, so if I'm understanding you correct, what your criticism of him is, he describes that this is what we see, but he's not really explaining. He hasn't offered a hypothesis for why. Is that what you're saying?
He hasn't offered a hypothesis for specific examples.
A common portion between all four of the manuscripts, and it is the letters, the word Wa Ridwan higher in each case. Now, the other question to ask is, what would be the cause, or is this merely a scribal error in all four of these cases? And there are some known causes of scribal error in early manuscripts, and so we're going to take a look at those at this moment. One of the most common reasons for a mistake is called dittography or haplography. Dittography is the writing of something twice, and haplography is the omission of something and moving on to the next, to a later portion in the text when copying a text, and just continuing from there. So it causes an omission of something that was ought to have been there. And both didactography and haplography are caused by something called parablepsis. Now, parablepsis is not a scribal error in itself. It is something that happens, and parablepsis means a skip of the I. So the I skips over to another portion in the text when somebody is copying. You're copying, you're writing down, and then you look away to fill the ink or some other thing, and then you look back at the text that you're copying from, and your eye falls upon the place in the text where you think you are supposed to be moving on from. Now, what would cause your eye to fall upon a place in the text that is different from the one that you're moving on from, that you are actually at? And the answer to that is something that is the same as what you just wrote. And so the common cause for parablepsis is the existence in the text that you're copying from of two instances of the same word or sequence of words in close proximity to each other. So let's say the word was min Allah, from Allah in this case. If that sequence of words, if Allah or min Allah occurred somewhere else in close proximity, maybe I wrote the word min Allah, I went to refill my ink, I looked back, and I saw the instance of min Allah, but it wasn't the right one. It was maybe the one earlier or the one later, and I continued writing. That would be a cause of me writing the wrong thing after that, if there was something different after those two instances of min Allah. So, that having been said, the first question then to ask on this page is, did the word Allah occur elsewhere on this page, or min Allah or taqwa min Allah in close proximity? And there is another instance of Allah later in this same verse, but it's preceded by wow. And so because of this, I don't think it's likely that a scribe would have confused this instance of Allah with that instance of Allah. And furthermore, that second instance of Allah is not followed by the word Ridwan. So that's a further reason to be quite certain that this is not an instance of parablepsis causing some either didactography or haplography. Okay, how about the words min Allah? Well, the word min Allah does not exist anywhere else in close proximity. The next instance is, well, it is 2 verses later in 9:1:11. And so if we look over at that, the word min Allah is likewise not followed by the word Ridwan. So, or wa Ridwan. So once again, we don't have anything that could account for what is happening here. And then finally, how about the words taqwa min Allah, fear of Allah? Does that occur anywhere else in proximity? And no, it does not exist anywhere else in proximity. In fact, it does not exist anywhere else in the Quran at all. And so I think we've completely ruled out the possibility of didactography or haplography due to parablepsis in this case. Now, one other thing that I would look at ordinarily if I wanted to be very thorough and look and rule out the possibility, particularly if there was a correction in a spot that looked like there was something that kind of formulaic, and there are many, the Quran is very, very repetitive, has many sort of stock phrases that get repeated again and again, is I would consider whether there is the possibility that the scribe had in mind, came upon one of those common phrases in the Quran and wrote it the way that it is elsewhere commonly written in the Quran, even though at the particular spot in question it was not supposed to be written that way. And so in order to do that, there are different ways that you would look at that, but the way that I ordinarily would look at something like that is to look at a concordance, and I would look up one of the words in it. In this case, maybe the word Khairun. Look it up and look at through all the instances that exist in the Quran to see where and how many places that word exists in a particular common phrase, and that could help me rule out whether it is likely or possibly a cause in a particular instance of correction. In this case, I don't think that applies because I don't see this phrase as being something that is formulaic, especially because, as I mentioned, the word taqwa min Allah does not occur elsewhere in the Quran. So
yeah,
he does not explain. He actually accepts, like I told you before, there are some examples where he accepts that it could be a scribal error or it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So
I suppose that's
explain which.
Yeah. I suppose that's probably not, maybe that's not his bag. That's not really what he's in the business of doing. Maybe I don't know.
But that's the main thing. That's the main thing
Yeah.
you're supposed to be doing,
Yeah.
and that's what he is. That is what he is
Yeah.
doing. If you look at his introduction, like
Yeah.
before he starts discussing
Yeah.
the corrections itself,
Yeah.
he tries to explain what's going on, like a general overview.
Yeah.
He says some of these instances could be scribal error, some
Yeah.
of these could be something more,
Yeah.
but that's not satisfying.
No, it's
You know,
not. But
if we,
I suppose I think academics tend to be quite conservative, and they don't want to jump the gun. So maybe sometimes all they're doing is reporting, and then trying to build more evidence till they come to some hypothesis, because hypotheses have to be built up from
but if that were the
evidence.
case, if that
Probably
were the
not
case,
enough.
if that
Maybe it's a case of not enough evidence to be able to say what's
no,
actually happening. Maybe.
no, I think that usually you can tell what's happening. You know, for example, some of the times where the verse doesn't make sense, he doesn't note it. That is something important to note.
Yeah.
You know, if the verse doesn't make sense without the correction, then that is something significant that he should have told us.
Yeah.
And it's also like it's his main point of discussion is the state of the Quranic text and corrections. The least we can expect from him is that he explains what's going on in specific places.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Okay.
also mentioned that he does not tell us which manuscripts have the standard reading and which ones don't. So that's
Yeah.
obviously
That may
something
be
to
something.
discuss.
If he watches this video, perhaps that would be something he can address himself at a
Yeah.
later video.
Yeah, of course, this is not something where I'm expecting you to answer it.
No,
I'm just giving it.
no, but I'm glad you're
general-
bringing it up, because it's something that that I may not have been conscious of, and as I did say at the outset, this is not my area of research, and I'm really glad that you've come on, to kind of to make us aware of all of these issues, and give us some excellent examples from the manuscripts. Any final words before we kind of wrap up?
Yeah, I'll just quickly discuss what the qira'at, okay? Unless you need to leave now.
No, we could. Maybe another few minutes. Maybe we can talk about Qur'an, because I know the Qur'an is a very entailed area. But do you want to kind of give your kind of take on the overall Qur'an?
Yeah, I'll just give a brief description of what they are.
Okay.
So if the qira'at are basically different ways of reciting the Quran, okay, and this raises a question: if Uthman standardized the text, why is this possible? The reason is Uthmanic text itself can be read in different ways. An example is here. This is a sample manuscript. Alam tara anna Allah khalaqa as-samawati wal ard. So this phrase over here, khalaqa as-samawati, okay, this text actually accommodates two different readings. So depending on how you put your vowels, you can write kha, la, kha with like a fatha on top, or you can say khaliq with a dagger, kha. Sorry, I should have used a different pen. But yeah, basically khaliqu. Okay. And the difference is, one is saying that Allah is the creator of the heavens and the earth, and the other one is saying Allah created the heavens and the earth. Okay, and there are many examples like this. Some of them have a more significant impact on the meaning, but I would like to clarify that there aren't 90,000 differences between the 10 readings. That's a misconception, a miscalculation. The actual number of variations is probably somewhere around 1,500 or so. So that might seem a lot, but that means that 95% or so of the Quran is recited the same. Okay. But I hope that by this you can get an idea of what the qira'at are. Okay, basically it's like, for example, this word waddan can be read waddan or wuddan depending on how you put your vowels. So that is what the qira'at are. They're different ways of vocalizing or putting the vowels, putting the dots in place. Okay, so if you look at
the vocalizations in some cases change the meaning.
Yes, they do change.
Okay.
But these variations are different from the variations you see in manuscripts. Manuscripts, for example, it would concern, if you look at the text itself, you will see a variant. For example, additional waw over here. Now, that is not something that shares the same consonantal text. This text over here is basically the rasm, the Uthmanic rasm. When we say Uthmanic rasm, it means without the dots, without the dots and dots. So
okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Mohammed, that was a fantastic presentation. Really good. I'm sure there will be lots of comments. So I hope you're willing to maybe respond to viewers' comments and questions and things like that.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
So listen, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure as well for me.
And it's a good area to kind of look at. And obviously, it's a very interesting topic because there's a lot of debate around different aspects of this. But I think good way to increase our collective knowledge is to trash out the different points of view and see which arguments hold up best to scrutiny. So thank you very much, Mohammed, and I wish you all the best. And I very much appreciate all the hard work you've put into the presentation.
Yeah, thank you for giving me a platform. Yeah.
Cheers. Thank you.